I'm your host, Christene Marie, and tonight I'm going to be diving into probably one of the most precious and dear things that you and I could ever possess. How do we recover it? How do we redeem and reclaim that which was lost? And what I'm talking about is the vulnerability of innocence, the childlike dream, and just that really almost like uncanny wonder at life. And it's been a real privilege over the last couple of weeks to be experiencing, whether through workshop or in doing another known founder event, and talking today with a mastermind community, just speaking with a number of different entrepreneurs and executives, and just hearing where they kind of lost their sense of wonder. And I love that word wonder. The gentleman I was doing the known founder with earlier this week, which is effectively an intensive 3-day event, we were chatting and we were talking about who were you as a child. And this process of really remembering is so incredibly important. And granted, it's so sad for those who have no really good memories. Their childhood was really clouded in a really dark way. Actually, I was listening to a podcast interview with Christy Brinkley. She was married to Billy Joel, who I absolutely adore. And so she was married to him for a number of years, and they split later on in life. But she was sharing, and she said, her first 8 years of her life, her biological father was truly awful and just almost like a monster, just absolutely miserable childhood and miserable experience. But when she and her mom found who she now calls her dad, she was 8 years old, and she basically chose, like, this is my new childhood. Like, these are the moments that I'm going to claim as childhood. And she just chose to look at it in such like a bright, vivacious way. So she actually didn't even do so much of like diving into those first 8 years. She just was like, I'm not going to let that have control and power over me. And so she really allowed for the next, 8 years old and all on, to just be a really, really wonderful time of life. And that's what she counts as her childhood. And so there is an element where we get to choose. If we don't have, the best childhood and upbringing, there's a real need to grieve that. But for others who have pleasant memories, and even for those of us who had a hard childhood growing up, but there were still moments of kind of purity there, that's so important for us to remember and to go back to those moments of, man, I felt like I was me. I felt like I was not self-conscious. Tonight, I was at my niece's talent show, and man, there were these kids from probably ages like 7 or 8 to 13 performing on stage, and they did everything from singing to magic shows, to telling jokes. This girl did like an interpretive dance. One of them did the skit, "Who's on First?" It was so funny, so fun. And I was just sitting there. My two sisters and I, we were just like, wow, they're so confident. And then I went over to my brother-in-law, and I'm just like, can you believe that they're on stage doing these kind of performances? And some of them are not that great, and they were so bright. They shined, like they really, really shined. And it was so fun to watch them not being self-conscious. They were up there so self-confident. And so it really made me think, as I'm seeing this juxtaposition over the last couple of weeks, diving in with these executives and founders, where we're effectively going back to moments in our childhood that were cataclysmic for us having almost like our first awakening. For many people who have a pleasant childhood and felt loved, even those who didn't necessarily, we all, for the most part, unless there was a real traumatic event at a very, very young age, for the most part, many of us can remember a moment in time where we woke up, where all of a sudden we came face to face with a moment, whether big or small, when all of a sudden we became self-conscious. And it's like we realized we were naked. And in that process, in that realization, there was a loss of innocence, a loss of vulnerability, and a loss of wonder. All of a sudden, we're not looking at the world with this big, bright eyes and like, wow, like, look, this is my playground. Do you remember being so young and the trees felt giant? I remember going to my grandparents' backyard and there was just this giant forest. They had all these blackberry bushes. There was this big fort. We would all play, my cousins and me, and it was just so endless, the expanse of their woods, and it was so fun. And now when I go today, I'm like, this is maybe an acre, and it was just so small. But as a kid, there's wonder. Everything feels alive and vibrant and big and full of life. And at some point, it's like, what was that moment for you and me where all of a sudden we woke up and all of a sudden our eyes shifted from looking up and out to down to others and then to ourselves. And we look at ourselves and we're like, oh, and we don't like what we see. We start judging it. So rather than being curious about out there, we start looking inward and we start judging inward. So what's lost is judgment, and what's exchanged is what's lost is curiosity for judgment. And what's exchanged is looking at the external world with bright eyes to looking inward at ourselves with that judgment. And so there's that exchange rate that happened, right? Where if we want to regain and reclaim some of that innocence, and y'all, I've experienced this and I've seen others experience it as well. We get to choose our perspective. We get to choose the lens through which we see the world. And so backing up to this concept of, for however long before that moment struck, when we suddenly woke up and became self-conscious, there was an element where we were fully in the present moment. We were so fixated. We were so curious. And we also dreamed. We lived in the future without, there was almost like no past, you know? There was no past to haunt us. There was no past to give us any sense of fear over the present moment or the future. And so once fear kicked in, once judgment kicked in, all of a sudden it was this changing of the dials. Like when you go to an optometrist and you push your face against the dials and they start shifting them and then you can see clearer. Well, what happens is that with every single cataclysmic moment of awakening that reveals more awareness of our self-consciousness and the state of ourselves, like I distinctly remember being 10 years old and feeling fat. And I distinctly remember talking about this talent show from tonight, watching all these little 10, 12-year-olds playing, messing up, making mistakes, and just continuing to go like no problem. I distinctly remember being at my first piano recital. I was probably 8. And man, it was so embarrassing. I messed up probably 4 times. The same thing, like I couldn't get it right. And I just got so stuck and I got so in my head and I was so embarrassed and I felt hot and I remember that moment forever. And I never wanted to play piano anymore, and now I'm like, okay, now I actually want to learn and practice again. But there's something about, man, tonight watching those kids, they messed up and they kept going and it was like no big deal. And so even my niece tonight, she came home, she was like, yeah, I forgot the words. And she like, no big deal, no skin off her nose. And there was a difference there. There was a real difference in the way that these young kids were able to hold themselves, roll their shoulders back, talk and act and sing with bravery and with courage. Whereas for me, I'm like, man, what will potentially be those moments? Because clearly it's not that on stage. So as I'm thinking about this moment of awakening, we wake up, we realize we're naked, we realize we're self-conscious, and then we put on our armor. And armor is going to look so different based on what the experience was, what was the narrative that was taught to us. So in that moment of waking up and feeling shame or judgment, that little sense of curiosity is lost, judgment is in its place, and now I'm forming a narrative. I'm forming a narrative around myself, a belief around myself, the world, and now my armor is going to be a behavior. So this new behavior comes into place like a shield. And so maybe I stop expressing emotions. Maybe I stop laughing so loud. Maybe I stop crying. Maybe I stop playing baseball. Maybe I stop playing piano. And so that shield is a developed behavior. And then for the rest of our lives, that behavior becomes our autopilot. It becomes our default. We don't really know why it's there now, today, as we look at our lives. We don't really know which of the behaviors in our lives are actually predicated in a belief that was established during a moment of vulnerability as we lost that spark of wonder. Because if we don't trace the roots back, we may never be able to reclaim the original innocent wonder that was there and can be ours today. So back to that example of the optometrist and shifting the dials, we actually have the ability to have another awakening. We woke up, became self-conscious, built these new behaviors based on those beliefs that developed during those moments, and then they became default and subconscious. So we have the opportunity now to reawaken and start seeing the world through the eyes of no longer the armor and no longer these default behaviors that have been subconsciously keeping us safe since we were 7 and we got laughed at. So now we're safe. We're not in the schoolyard being laughed at anymore. But we actually have to do the work to prove to that little kid who was laughed at that they actually can venture forth and try again, or venture forth and try something new. So, with that whole process of, okay, so reawakening, becoming aware of what are the default behaviors, what are the default beliefs that were there and established because of a moment of pain or shame in childhood that we never resolved. It's really important to lean into those moments. What was the wonder that was lost and exchanged for judgment? Even today, I was doing a workshop with folks, and we were doing a real analysis of our life, and we were analyzing the current state of every single area of our life. So financially, relationally, emotionally, professionally, spiritually, I can't remember the physically. And we did an audit. We gave ourselves a score in each category. And then we effectively said, this is the current state. How do I feel about it? What does it look like practically in my life? And then we also considered, okay, what's my target ideal? And then we asked why. Why is my current state the way that it is? And why is my target the way it is? Y'all, so many of us have adopted not just those beliefs and behaviors from that moment in time where shame kicked into gear, but so many of us have adopted these target ideals because we're like, oh, okay, I shouldn't like that. Oh, okay, I shouldn't play that instrument. Oh, okay, I'm too loud or too big or too much. And so then how should I act? So now we start looking to everyone around us at 10, 12, 14 years old to tell us how to exist. Well, we lost that little kid. We lost our true authentic self back there. So this whole process of knowing is really about reclamation and going back to that little kid, remembering, and then being like, okay, these are the behaviors, these are the beliefs that are not actually who I am, not actually how I want to be, because some of the targets that we place for today as goals really actually aren't what we want at all. But we've never taken the time to stop and really ask ourselves, what do I want in the first place? During the Known Founder, this was another 3-day intensive. I sat with someone and I really, really pressed into, what do you want? Stop telling me what your clients want. Stop telling me what your partners want. Stop telling me what your kids want. Stop telling me what your spouse wants. What do you want? And it was so hard to get to that point. And y'all, it took me a while to start cultivating the muscle of being even aware of what is my body even telling me. I had shut off my intuition because I had outsourced it to everyone around me. Everyone else had the say in what my target should be and what success meant and what my goals were, because apart from the space, the arena, the time set aside to do an audit of not just how am I feeling, how am I doing on a health scale, am I actually healthy and physically in shape, but how am I actually living? Am I being the person that at the end of my life I'll look back and say, wow, I'm really, really proud of the man and woman that I am, the way that I lived? Because every decision we're making today is writing our legacy in real time. And so we have to go back and do our homework and retrace some of our steps and identify, okay, at 12 years old, this moment happened, and this is the belief that was formed about me, about the world, about people, about God. And then this is the behavior that shows up and manifests as armor. And then if I was to remove that armor, What's there? I liken it to this concept of a wall. With every unprocessed moment and emotion, a brick forms. It's like a little bit of water mixes with a little bit of clay and a brick forms. And then over time, all these unprocessed bricks and unprocessed moments surmount into a wall. And then all of a sudden we're like, why do I feel so not seen, so not heard? And we're so disconnected from everyone around us. Well, it's because we're existing behind a wall. And the thing also is that so often we're actually disconnected from ourselves. Today at the workshop, someone they just mentioned it was actually really vulnerable, and I so appreciated it. I said, what is they were ranking themselves on the professional scale, and I think that they gave themselves a lower score, and they said my target would be more exposure. And I said, okay, well, what's getting in the way of that? Like, why are you not getting there? And he said, well, I'm really afraid of what I'm really afraid. And I said, well, what are you afraid of? And I was like, tell me to stop asking questions if you want me to, but what are you actually afraid of? And he said, I'm afraid of what people will say. And it was so vulnerable, like that's a hard thing to admit. And I just listened, and I was like, what would you say? What would you say about you if you were in the limelight and you were exposed? What would you say about you? And he kind of looked at me a little funny. He was like, I don't know. Y'all, that's the narrative that really matters. The judgment we assign to other people is often the judgment we're assigning to ourselves. So I had this realization, okay, I'm so afraid that people are going to perceive me as egotistical, as full of myself, as prideful. But then I realized at the end of the day, I'm actually terrified of becoming that person. So I'm blaming, oh, but I can't be too big. I can't be too much because I don't want them to feel X, Y, or Z. When in reality, I am actually just afraid of becoming an egotistical monster. And so, do I actually want to do what it takes to make the impact that I want to make? And if I do want to do what it takes, and if I am willing, then what is necessary to get me to that next level? How do I need to grow? How do I need to change? What are the guardrails I need to put in place? Our guardrails aren't just the values that we hold. Values are great guardrails. They serve as bumpers in the bowling alley, right? Guarding us and guiding us on our way towards our goals. But there are so many other guardrails that we can put in place, such as accountability, such as the continuous pursuit and the habit and the ritual of going deep every single day to do that self-audit and look in the mirror. We can self-perpetuate awakening on a daily basis, because the reality is so many of us are asleep in so many different areas of our lives that we don't even realize. But when we take the time, and that's where that's a big vulnerable step to actually create time in the first place. Because if we create the time, we will surely see the truth. And then the question becomes, am I even wanting to see the truth? Am I willing to see it? What will happen when I see it? We don't know. And so there's a fear there because it doesn't feel safe. But if we can start doing the initial steps of allowing curiosity to come back into our lives to replace judgment, so that if I act out and I react to my kid in anger, and I'm like, oh, why was I angry just now? Rather than judging, or our kid. Let's start with our kid. What a great opportunity there. Do it for somebody else. Be curious instead of judgmental. That's starting to train literally our nervous system. Our body, our physical body, remembers how we've treated it in the past. Our children's bodies, our spouses' bodies, they remember how they were treated, maybe not by us, but by every other person in their life. They remember how they were treated by their mother at 7 years old, and they developed a protective armor to keep them safe. They've got a brick wall in place. So y'all, how much of the time are we actually not even arguing with our partner, but we're arguing with their wall? We're not actually connecting. We're not actually communicating. It's two people armored up fighting. That's what fighting is that you both have your swords, you've got your shields, you're ready to go into battle. How would it be if we were to replace those armor pieces and actually have a new way of going about it and going into the arena? Like Theodore Roosevelt talks about in his speech. I just love that speech, y'all. Citizens in the Arena, there's that section where he talks about the man in the arena. And it's so, so good. It's effectively, you're going in, your face is marred and covered with dust, and you're tired and exhausted. And the critic is sitting on the outskirts, pointing and laughing, pointing and judging. And y'all, every single one of us has a critic inside us. That critic sounds like the bully at 7 who pointed and laughed, our parent who, out of anger, said something that we will forever remember and that forever haunts us until we actually go back to that moment to take radical responsibility for it, to sit in that little kid's shoes, sit with them in their pain. And that's part of why doing the work, doing the knowing process, doing the knowing experiences and workshops, y'all, you can do it on your own. You don't need, this is what knowing is so amazing. This is why I love it, is because it's really healing on your own. I actually bought that domain, healing on your own, because this is what's possible. We don't have to outsource our healing. Let's stop outsourcing healing. Let's stop outsourcing our dependency on anybody else and start allowing for ourselves to truly be the caretakers of our souls, because it's possible. And there's so much love to be found and experienced in that, because we get to reclaim the innocence that was lost. We get to reclaim the wonder and live and truly experience life because we're actually awake now. But we cannot do that unless we're willing to look in the mirror, unless we're willing to take apart the bricks and say, what's in here? What haven't I processed? What haven't I actually allowed myself to feel that I need to feel in order to dismantle the brick entirely and be a little bit more open, a little bit more awake, a little bit more alert, and see the world and receive what is to be given to us. It's like standing out and feeling the sunshine on our face first thing in the morning. We actually have to get outside, sit, find the sunlight, and then open ourselves up to it, take off the clothes and expose ourselves for the sun. There's work we have to do to go get the sunlight that we need for health. But there's an experience there. There's a warmth, there's the tingling, there's a vitamin D exchange. There's so much that takes place in that transaction, in that moment, after we move through the pursuit of it. And y'all, that's what knowing does. It's shedding off the old and allowing for the experience of something new on a generational level. We were talking about that today in the mastermind. There's generational weights that we carry years upon years. We carry these weights that were handed down by our parents, from our grandparents. And that we don't have to hold on to that anymore, but we have to know that it's there to then lay it aside. And so I think that's it. There's one practice that I want to wrap up with for tonight. There was 3 steps very early on in my journey of knowing that really helped me come to start waking up and starting to be aware and starting to exchange, laying off judgment and putting on curiosity. And there was just 3 steps. One was slow down. If I start feeling triggered, if I start feeling upset, especially this is the holiday season, so we're going to be with family in close quarters without an escape. Slow down. Stop. For the love of God, we need to stop rushing. But in that moment in particular, slow down. Go to the bathroom and then lean into that feeling and lean into that emotion, lean into what just happened, and then ask why. And journal. I just have, honestly, I had notes on my phone, and I still do, where I would just be like, okay, they said this, they did this, I feel this way, I don't know why, but I ask why, and then what it is that this moment in time, this moment in the present, slowing down, leaning in to the feelings, like physically in my body, I might feel sick to my stomach, I might actually get a headache, I might feel a pain or a sensation or even an emotion behind my eyes. So in the present moment, we have an activation. We feel something in our body. This isn't right. We lean in, slow down, we ask why, and then we trace the roots, asking why all the way down to the past. And that past moment is where the brick lies. It's an unprocessed experience, unprocessed emotion. And we might find ourselves on Thanksgiving Day sitting in the bathroom weeping about something that happened at 10 years old. Y'all, it was Christmas Day. Oh, it was Christmas Day I guess it was 3 years ago, where I can't even remember what happened, but something small happened, and I went into the bedroom and I just started writing, and I just started crying for that 20-year-old girl who got married and had so much love in her heart and had no idea how much pain was on the other side, and did her best. And I just really wept for that little girl. And even now as I say it, I get chills. Like, it's really important that we're not just weeping for the little kid, but we're weeping for what's now. And it doesn't mean it has to be weeping, but there is something about the actual release. It's the outpouring, it's the letting go, because otherwise that emotion has actually been trapped in our body. So what knowing allows for is attribution. And so for those who don't necessarily know what I mean by that, when we're looking at something in front of us, here, this moment happened in the present, but the real attribution, if I trace it back, it's actually here in the past, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 months ago, whatever the date and time is. Real attribution to the pain means that we've got to ask why and travel the yellow brick road down to the Genesis moment. So this holiday season, slow down, lean in, ask why. And that's just an incredible practice to ensure that we're living more curious rather than judgmental. We're living more awake, and we're able to experience it so much more. I would be shocked if after you start exchanging the judgment for curiosity, if you don't start finding yourself just noticing the trees, noticing the sun more, noticing the flowers, noticing the little moments, because all of a sudden the little moments become precious. We're filled with wonder again. It's the dials are shifting. And the beautiful thing there is that heading into the Christmas holiday, Thanksgiving holiday, we get to even tell our family, hey, I'm actually practicing wonder. Like we talk about practicing gratitude. Let's practice wonder. Oh, I love that, guys. I'm committed to that. Let's do it. Let's practice wonder. Let's practice marveling at the little things. Like, my sister just made me this wonderful cup of tea, and I'm about to go upstairs and be with my sisters, and we were just dancing around the kitchen, having a great time. That's a moment I never want to forget tonight. And that's the thing. If we were to live every day recognizing there's like a sacrality, it's sacred. There's a beauty. We will never get today back. We will never get today back. So how are we going to make it wonderful? I bought a 5-year journal where there's 365 pages and there's multiple, you write out what year it is, and then you write out what happened that day. Y'all, every day is a miracle. And I really mean that. I'm not meaning it in a cheesy way. I mean every day. So we've got a couple hours left in today. Let's do something fun. Let's make it meaningful. Text the person, call the person, do what you want. Doing what we want really allows us to be present. And I'm not saying do what we want, throw caution to the wind. I'm not talking about being foolish. I'm talking about delight and wonder and the purity that's there, the innocence that we had once when we were kids. That's possible to feel again, to wake up. And I even had this thought one day, and I promise I'll wrap up here. I woke up a couple months ago, and I just laid in bed, and I was like, I wonder if I was to play a role of a genuinely grateful person, how would I engage today? And I just kind of had that question running through my head. If I was to play this role of someone who's so grateful, guys, I don't want to lose any more family members. I don't want to lose any more futures to force me to wake up. I want to self-induce, self-inflict awakening every single day, so that I don't let a single day pass me by. I don't let a single moment or experience pass me by, because it is too precious. These people in our lives are too precious. Each one of us has a call on our lives to do something miraculous. And it doesn't mean it has to be big. I'm not talking about miracle in terms of size or grandeur. I'm talking about miracle with intention. Each one of us has something unique to bring to the world that AI can never replace. It can replace a whole lot of things, but not you and me. But if we don't know who we are, it actually can replace us, because we're not actually existing.